Welcome, everyone, and thank you for choosing to spend your time with us tonight. My name is Queenie, and I am the archivist for the Captiva Island Historical Society, and along with my husband, Dave Jensen, the sponsor of this evening's event. Before we begin the program, I just need to do a little bit of light housekeeping. I wanted to let you know that the restrooms are located to the left of the entrance that you came into the lobby this evening. During the program, we do encourage you to take photos and videos and share it on your favorite social media outlets. But also at this time, let's just all check to make sure that our cell phones are turned off. Not turned off, cell phone silenced, excuse me. It'd be hard to take photos if you turn your cell phone off. I wanted to make sure that you all knew that there's going to be yummy desserts in the lobby after the program, so make sure you stay for that. And then also, there will be quite a few people that you'll want to meet, interesting people that are in our audience tonight. And so you'll have a chance to meet those folks in the lobby as we have dessert as well. So I'm thinking so we may appropriately thank you. By show of hands, could you let us know if you're a veteran or active service member? Thank you very much. Thank you for your service. Now let's start what we really came here for this evening. And I don't mean the yummy desserts either. About 4 years ago, I was in our organization's office doing what I do best, and that's keeping to myself, minding my own business, and digitizing our archives for our online collection. When this gentleman walked in the room, his name is Ken Sushil. He introduced himself to me. It turns out, as a young boy, Mr. Sushil lived on Captiva and had recently written 2 children's books based on his childhood on Captiva. One of those books, Tales from the Water Barrel, The War Years, highlighted things that were happening on Captiva during the years of World War II. It was Mr. Sushil's books that inspired my creation of the program this evening. So the character you'll meet tonight on stage is fictional, but the script has been gleaned from our archives at the Captiva Island Historical Society, as well as Mr. Sushil's book. And by the way, I got my book autographed straight away when I met Mr. Sushil. You'll have the chance to get yours tonight too, as he's brought some copies for you to purchase in the lobby after the program. So, with great respect and gratitude for those who served their very best duty in some really difficult places, and for those who waited at home for their return, let's start our sentimental journey.
A lot was going on back then, both over there and here on Captiva. I've got a few letters that I received during that time, and well, since you folks are kind enough to drop by and share some time with me tonight, how about I read a few of them? How about if we start with one from my friend Betsy? While at Alice O'Brien's, I saw her new first aid chest. Mr. Ding Darlin had sketched the most adorable drawing inside of it, and well, yeah, that reminded me that I still needed to go by Dad's to collect his contribution for the Red Cross auction. I hurried over to Dr. Beals, and who was there but little Kenny Sushil with his ma and pa. I saw one of Kenny's little bare feet, had a clean rag wrapped around it, and when I asked what had happened, Mr. Sushil told me he'd been mowing Mr. Chadwick's yard that morning, and although he'd warned Kenny not to, the child walked behind the tractor, and sure enough, he stepped on a broken bottle. I felt rightly sorry for little Kenny, who had gotten a first-hand lesson on cuts and how you bleed, but it also gave me an idea. This year, I'd been asked by the Lee County Red Cross chairman to head up fundraising on Captiva. At first I said, well, I didn't know anything about such a thing, but with my husband in combat, and my best friend on the island's husband in combat too, I said, sure, we'll do it. Jean Loomis said that we could have an auction on the patio at her home, and for the blood drive, I asked Gerald Sushil if he would make a cross for us out of chicken wire, which he did, and early in the morning, we ladies went around the island and gathered up bushel baskets of red hibiscus, and we made a big hibiscus cross. It was really quite stunning. We had asked every single person on the island to make something for the auction, everyone including the little folks. And thanks to Alice O'Brien, our auctioneer beyond compare, even 3-year-old Teddy Loomis and our little Jimmy's shell jewelry got auctioned off at some very handsome prices, much to the children's delight. Signe Whiteman donated 3 loaves of her homemade bread that everyone loves. The first loaf up for bid had Ding Darlin and Mr. Hutchinson, the president of Bethlehem Steel, bidding against each other. And that one loaf of bread eventually went for $37. Signe's 2 other loaves of bread went for $35 each. Oh, to see Mrs. Whiteman's joy and amazement when her bread went for that price. That night at dinner, we were all treated to a thin slice of pure gold Signe bread. Later on, when the money was all counted, I went down to the Coast Guard station on Sanibel, which is the only means of communication to the mainland, and they radioed over to Fort Myers and told the Red Cross chairman how much money we'd raised. The radio man had to repeat it 3 times because our auction overpassed the quota for all of Lee County. And maybe more importantly, as little Kenny Sushil said about our blood drive, almost all of Captiva had shown up at our big red hibiscus cross and bled a little for our country.
Must remember this, a kiss is still a kiss, a sigh is just a sigh. The fundamental things apply as time goes by. And when 2 lovers swoon, they still say I love you, on that you can rely. No matter what the future brings, as time goes by.
Mother's letters were always written in the same calm hand, with the occasional dramatic account of some excitement back home. Dear Vernon, they say things happen in threes. Well, these days, I'm trying to think of only nice things that happen in threes. Like the way Mary always puts 3 sugars in her tea, or one of Signe Whiteman's 3-layer cakes, or the 3-legged races we used to have when Hattie Gore was running the hotel. Those are the threes I'd like to think about, rather than the unnerving 3 events which have happened of late, and I am now emboldened to describe to you, son. A few weeks ago, it seems the Sushils were visiting Jimmy and Signe Whiteman down at the Gulfview Inn, as they often do on Sundays. No doubt Jimmy was probably telling that old story about those goats he used to have on his farm out west, back before he moved to Florida. Because it seems at some point in the late afternoon, the 2 older boys, Roy Whiteman and Gerald Jr., wandered away from the other children to do a bit of exploring and wandered away from onto the beach. It being around dusk and all, the boys were looking out for the green flash when what do they see on the horizon but what I hear them describe as a narrow black object that was seemingly getting bigger and bigger as it headed in their direction. Roy questioned what it was, and Gerald Jr. thought maybe it was one of those German submarines. The Coast Guard, they'd been warning about those things, and the boys skedaddled back right quick to tell their parents. Of course, both sets of parents were skeptical. I hear Mr. Sushil took the opportunity to explain to the children that this was the reason that we put black paint on the top half of our automobile's headlights to keep down the glare which otherwise might help guide spy submarines along the coast. Well, I guess the next morning, Mr. Sushil drove to the Coast Guard station, and after giving an account of what the boys saw, he was told to keep reporting anything suspicious from then on, because every bit of information is important. Next thing you know, Jean Hayford tells me when her husband Max and their 14-year-old daughter Ann walked over to the Gulf for their usual 6 a.m. swim. What do they find out? But footprints which started at the shoreline and continued up the beach. Soon after, a Coast Guard Jeep drove up to the Hayford's house, and when asked if they'd noticed anything suspicious lately, Max and Ann promptly showed the officer the footprints, which they later learned belonged to 2 men, German soldiers, who had come ashore after being dropped off by a Cuban fishing boat. Later we heard that those 2 German soldiers had managed to get to Buck Key, but after spending one night on that bug-infested island, those 2 men surrendered to the Coast Guard without a fight. And then, well, wouldn't you know it, for the 3rd time just yesterday, I was at the dock waiting for the mailboat, and the Doherty's daughter-in-law was waiting there too, suitcase in hand, as she'll be leaving Fort Myers today. Her husband is a submarine man, and naturally, she worries about him so much, and last night she couldn't sleep, so she scratched on the screen of Betsy Stayard and asked if she'd like to join her for a moonlight walk on the beach. Betsy's husband, Pete, is on the Western Front, and the 2 ladies were just out there on the beach, each caught up in their own thoughts, when they look out over the water, and not too terribly far offshore, they see a submarine surfacing. Well, I hear she and Betsy got off the beach in a hurry. They jumped in Dr. Beale's car and used his precious gas and drove down to the Coast Guard. It was about 3 in the morning, and the ladies had to wake the Coast Guard up. But the boys thanked them very much and said that there are no American submarines in our area, and then asked them to please say nothing about it. Mother never could keep a secret.
It's not the pale moon that excites me, that thrills and delights me. Oh no, it's just the nearness of you. It isn't your sweet conversation that brings this It's just the nearness of you. When you're in my arms and I feel you so close to me, all my wildest dreams come true. I need no soft lights to enchant me, if you'll only grant me the right to hold you ever so tight and to feel in the night the nearness of you.
Here's one from my buddy Henry Rhodes. Dear Vernon, hopefully there'll be a cigar here for you when you get back from the front. Yep, you guessed it, me and the Mrs. Rhodes had ourselves another young'un. Well, you know, me and the Mrs. already got children, so many children. Sometimes we go about 10 or 12 months without having kids. But usually it's 9. But I'm doing pretty well and been working for Mr. Chadwick for quite a while now. I've gotten up to where I make $1.50 a day. But considering the latest addition to our family, I felt like I needed a little hand. So last week, I went to have a serious talk with Mr. Chadwick, and for the very first time, I was invited inside the manor house. I was ushered into the house, and on the way to the room where I was to meet with Mr. Chadwick, I walked past their indoor saltwater swimming pool. Yup, it's true. It's the talk of the island, and the likes of which I ain't never seen. So finally, there I am, face to face with old man Chadwick, and I go into my explanation of how things are at my house and the new young'uns, and what with me bringing home that kind of pay, $1.50 a day. And I hardly get started before Mr. Chadwick started talking to me about how hard things were and what problems he's having with the lime groves down at Wolford, and on and on and on. You know, Vernon, after I listened to that old man for about 30 minutes, I reached down into my pocket to see if I had a quarter to give him. Oh. But I shouldn't go on that way. After all, when an old man like that has got a wife who thinks she still needs to be looking like she's 18 years old, well, that's got to weigh on old man Chadwick mighty heavy. Remember the way Mrs. Chadwick put Scotch tape on her face to smooth out her wrinkles? Well, last week, I understand, Mrs. Chadwick was entertaining some of her relations, and being they ain't got no air conditioning, and as hot and humid as it was, that Scotch tape just starts curling up all over her face. Of course, most everyone gets on with the Chadwicks, so we all bit our tongues. And no one mentioned a thing about Rosamond's curly face. That is, we're all having a good laugh about it now. Okay, Maestro. You've done a good job so far. What have you got to say about that?
All right, here's another one. Someday, when I'm awfully low, when the world is cold, I will feel a glow just thinking. Wait a minute. Are we referring to the lady with the Scotch tape?
You got it.
Oh.
The same.
I will feel a glow just thinking of you and the way you look tonight. Oh, but you're lovely with your smile so warm and your cheeks so soft. There is nothing for me but to love you just the way you look tonight.
Here's one from 1943. My dear friend Vernon, when your girl starts a letter that way, you ought to know what's coming next. I hope this letter gets to you before you hear it from anyone else. It's hard to write, but with you so far away, I feel I should be the one to tell you. In just a few days, I will be Mrs. John Wakefield. Vernon, you and I will always be friends, but I think Johnny and I were destined to meet because he'd been stationed in Venice, and as fate would have it, he somehow had himself transferred to Page Field, and so I met Second Lieutenant John Wakefield when his Air Force Ordnance unit rented a cottage on Captiva. Johnny's been living in that cottage with his enlisted men. I suppose word got out our cook makes wonderful pies and that mother is very accommodating, because before you knew it, all the soldiers seemed to be performing extra patrol around the inn. Well, she never did let on that she was aware of how absolutely breathtaking she was. Johnny is head of the gunnery operation at Bowman's Beach. You know, Marie Dickey and I have been friends since we were in diapers together. And she thinks I shouldn't mention it to you. But when I met Johnny, it seems I just fell head over heels in love with him. And he with me. I truly hope you can find it in your heart to share my happiness. Following the nuptials, we'll honeymoon at Ding Darlin's Fish House. Remember, Vernon, back in '39 when I was home from boarding school and Mr. Darling took us to see the fish house he'd been building? Well, I'm embarrassed to recall that day I blurted out, "That would be a wonderful place for a honeymoon if I ever get married." Oh, how I hope I didn't lead you on that day. What were we, 13, 14? Just kids, really. Well, wouldn't you know it, Mr. Darling remembered that I'd said that and has offered Johnny and I the fish house for our honeymoon. Well, I guess that was that, because other than some small talk, the letter is signed, "Your friend forever, Dottie."
My funny Valentine, sweet comic Valentine, you make me smile with my heart. Your looks are laughable, unphotographable, yet you're my favorite work of art. Is your figure less than Greek? Is your mouth a little weak when you open it to speak? Are you smart? But don't change a hair for me, not if you care for me. Stay, little Valentine, stay. Each day is Valentine's Day.
letter from Sister was always welcomed by us boys overseas. It reminded us of those simpler times back home. Heidi-ho, Vern, old man, how are you? Could you somehow please find a way to tell Mother people can listen to the radio during black-eyed hours? I'll be 14 this year, and Mother treats me like I'm a baby, and sometimes I want to scream. In Sunday school at the Johnson's house, Miss Miriam says self-control is important, especially these days, so instead of screaming, I thought I'd write you a letter. Maybe you're too busy fighting commies to care about things here on Captiva, but I'm just about to burst with all the details of Miss Dottie's wedding. I guess I should be glad that I got Dottie's letter before this one. But really, Vern, anyone here could tell you about the wedding because everyone on Captiva was there. It was at 12 noon on Saturday, May 1st, and Daddy says he thinks there are about 100 people at the inn that day. Mother and I finally agree on something because we both think Miss Dottie looked just like an island princess, dressed in her white gown and veil, and in her hair a real crown of orange blossoms. She carried a big bouquet of gardenias that smelled like what I think heaven is going to smell like. It was really kind of funny. Clara Strand passed the nuts. Some of the guests even arrived by Air Force crash boat. Now that was exciting. Daddy said the minister who married them is a chaplain at Page Field. I don't know about that, but I do know the groom, Lieutenant Wakefield, looked almost as handsome as the photos I saw on Radio Guide of Gene Autry in his uniform. Here's some more from Sister. Zandra Kalman had asked Mrs. Price if she could give the wedding cake because some people in St. Paul did such a lovely one. When Mrs. Kalman ordered it, she made a little white lie and told them the wedding was really a couple of weeks before the actual date. Mother says that she did that because it'd be better to have a stale cake than no cake at all. It arrived the day of the wedding. I saw it when I snuck into the kitchen at the inn. It was all covered in cinders, but cook brushed it off, powdered it up with sugar, and put flowers all around, and it was beautiful and yummy. I wanted to save you a piece, but no one will tell me when you're going to come home. Vern, I hope you're back before I get married, but maybe I'll be an old maid. The Ross sisters aren't married, and they're happy. But honest to goodness, Vern, it would be killer diller if you could be back home on Captiva before New Year.
I'll be home for Christmas. You can plan on me. Please have snow and mistletoe and presents on the tree. Christmas Eve will find me where the love light gleams. I'll be home for Christmas, if only in my dreams.
In this letter, it seems Mother accidentally sent me some notes that she'd meant for the Captiva Women's Auxiliary. But I cherish these gems, if only for the pleasant memories in which Mother writes about one of my favorite people. Mother wrote, I would like to speak in tribute of Alice O'Brien because she is the reason so many of us are here today. Her dedication to our community and to our country is worthy of praise. Miss O'Brien is an adventurer, a skillful fisherman, a humanitarian, a collector of art, and a lover of nature, whose friends are just as numerous as Miss O'Brien is generous. Miss O'Brien serves tea parties for Captiva's youngest with the same flair as when she entertains President Truman's press secretary, Charles Ross, whenever he's here on the island visiting his sisters, J.B. and Helen. Now, here it seems that Mother made a list. Some of the things on the list I hope wouldn't make it into this testimonial. Alice has a great sense of humor, often dresses in costume. Alice always has a fresh permanent, which isn't always particularly good. Many homes here are built from cypress from Alice's lumber mill in Shamrock, Florida. Alice was the first white woman to cross the continent of Africa. She had hired a white hunter to accompany her and later fired him in the middle of the jungle because she felt he wasn't treating the natives kindly. Alice had the first television set on Captiva. Alice's yacht, the Wanagon III, has been called into service by the Coast Guard. Alice is a bit of a tomboy. She always wears slacks, and when it comes to hats, she always wears a beret. Now this is particularly funny. Alice is so afraid of being without her beret, she'd had an extra one put in a safety vault in the bank. Alice once had a party and gave a live animal to every guest. To her brother, she gave a cat. Her mother received a cow. And her best friend, a ladybug in a matchbox.
I think she's my sister. Yeah. I get too hungry for dinner at 8. I like the theater, but never come late. I never bother with people I hate. That's why the lady is a tramp. I don't like crap games with barons and earls. I don't go to Harlem in ermine and pearls. Won't dish the dirt with the rest of the girls. That's why the lady is a tramp. I like the fresh wind in my hair, life without care. I'm broke, it's oak, hate hate K.O. Costa, it's cold and it's damp. That's why this lady is a tramp.
Now it seems to me I saw another one about Alice O'Brien somewhere in here. Here it is, from Betsy Stayart. Dear Vernon, Jean Loomis and her sister Sue and I were discussing this horrific war and about how women's roles in the effort are casually talked about these days. Well, it made us wonder if any folks in our area had heard of Alice O'Brien's volunteer work in the First World War. Initially going to France as a motor repair worker, then pressed into service as auxiliary nurse, ultimately volunteering as a truck driver, transporting foodstuffs to the canteens. That type of frontline service is quite frightful for us to think about. But what was most shocking to our friend Sue was that she'd heard after the Great War Miss O'Brien stayed on in France, and on occasion Alice O'Brien had eaten snails. Well, now I ask you, Vernon, with all the things us islanders have been known to eat, why would eating snails be such a shock to Sue? As I recall, Sue was with us when that porpoise washed ashore at Tween Waters, and I even remember Sue standing on the beach when Mr. Darling determined that the porpoise had been killed by a depth charge, and later Sue stayed on to watch when they went to carve steaks out of it. That night for dinner, We had fried chicken, fried raccoon, and broiled porpoise. I can't remember what Sue ate, but I must say that I enjoyed the chicken most of all. Us Captivans have no shame in enjoying some raccoon perlou when it's cooked up right. Now, you know it's best when it's boiled in a pot over an open fire in the grapefruit groves. All that rich raccoon fat coming up, and then throwing some rice in that pot for the last few minutes. Somebody might have a sweet potato to throw in there. Oh! Oh! And certainly, Sue must know raccoon perlou is one reason why David Whiteman has all those raccoon pelts. At the island store, Signe Whiteman has been serving variations of chicken a la king on her menu, but it's not like the rabbit population has been suffering any ill effects. Before I sign off, let me tell you this. Last week, I was visiting Grace Price and Dottie at the inn when suddenly I was startled by a knock on their door. With the blackout curtains drawn, I hadn't realized how late it was. But Dottie gets up, just as calm as anyone, and lo and behold, on the other side of the door, there stood one of those Coast Guard boys asking for a drink of water. Grace welcomed him with, "Of course, come on in." And no sooner had she said that when the young man motioned his hand and the whole patrol came piling into their living room. Nowadays, it seems to be a common occurrence at the inn, and as it turns out, every day their cook makes an extra pie or extra cake or something like that for the Coast Guard who is out there to protect us. Naturally, Vern, I thought of you. Those kids are just young boys. So maybe so many of them away from home for the first time. Well, we all sat in the kitchen, and while they were eating their pie, they told us stories about their girlfriends and how homesick they were. And when the pie was done and the last gulp of milk swallowed, we all said goodnight, and the boys went off to patrol the beach again.
For it's a long, long way from May to December, but the days grow short when you reach September, and the autumn weather turns the leaves to flame. One hasn't got time for the waiting game, and the days dwindle down to a precious few. September, November, and these precious days I'll spend with you. These golden days I'll spend with you.
We never knew what the mail had gone through to reach us boys, but when I got this letter from Max Hayford, it looked like instead of putting it on the mailboat Santiva, Max put this letter on the ark with Noah. October is here, and gone are those lazy days of summer when Betsy Stayart and Gene Loomis would walk across the pass to Upper Captiva with their children for picnics at low tide. On the home front, there's a concentrated effort on what the average person can do to help you boys overseas. These days, ration coupons are exchanged for typewriters, nylons, and silk, none of which we have much use for here on Captiva. And that said, when the 53rd Fighter Group was training pilots over the Gulf. One of the planes apparently failed, and the pilot had to bail out. Instead of landing in the water, that poor fellow had the bad luck of landing on Buck Key. And you know the mosquitoes on Buck Key are so bad. He cut himself out as quick as he could and swam right out of there, leaving the parachute behind. It wasn't more than a day later, my Gene had gotten hold of that silk parachute and requisitioned it into service at our house. In other words, Gene, Ann, and I are now wearing new underwear. Hand sewn by the missus. It's not the finest quality fabric, but it was plentiful and the price was right. There's been a few rationing, there's been a new rationing effect too. This time it's bicycles, fuel oil, and shoes. What is puzzling to me, Vernon, is the shift of concern over submarine attack to that of rationing of rubber footwear. John Oster came down to inspect the construction of his new home and cottages near Blind Pass and said he does not believe the Lee County resort islands are in the least danger from Japanese invasion. If you ask Alice O'Brien, you know an additional concern is that of erosion. Especially at this time of year, the storms give a regular beating to our shoreline. Miss O'Brien is still active in Captiva's anti-erosion committee, as is Joe Whiteman. But currently, Uncle Joe is out in Monterey, California. And here's the second part of that same letter. It's been several weeks since I last wrote you. You may not know it, but a hurricane, which was supposed to make landfall in Miami and run up the East Coast, hit real strong over here. And on October 20th, Captiva took a pounding from about 3 a.m. right up until daylight. Gene, Ann, and I are happy to report that things are more or less untouched here at our house. Up the street, the Johnsons weren't as fortunate. Belton and Miriam's home wasn't just hit by the hurricane, but in the middle of the hurricane, there was a twister, and it took the Johnsons' house up and off its foundation. Their house is completely destroyed, but Belton is already thinking about the new one and wants it to be exactly the same floor plan as the other. Dorothy Wakefield walked the beach from Tween Waters to Captiva Pass and said if she didn't know she was on Captiva, she'd never have recognized the place. Belton and I went around when we'd heard Grandmother Gore had broken her shoulder, and we heard Captain Smith, who had been ill even before you left for Europe, had the unfortunate timing to meet his maker on the very day of the hurricane. A few of us men went around Captiva, sifting through the debris, trying to scrape up enough wood to make Captain Smith a decent coffin. And no sooner than we built it when Mrs. Smith tells us that she can't bear the thought of her husband lying in that hard wooden box, and hands us a quilt that she'd made. Well, we didn't have the heart to tell her the quilt and her husband both wouldn't fit in the coffin. So we just hid her comforter outside in the bushes and nailed up that coffin real quick before she had time to say her goodbyes. When the hurricane ripped through, Belton had taken a bad one, with some flying nails and debris tearing him open. But maybe worse off was his mother-in-law, who had been staying with him and Miriam at the time. You know those older ladies before they go on a trip, or if there's disaster impending, take a dose of salts to ease their constitution? Well, it seems Miriam's mother had done just that. And she was on the throne about the time Belton decided that they better get out of there. And those Epsom salts just kept on working. But other than these events, I've had no excuse in not getting this off to you sooner. After the hurricane, the mail boat didn't come around for 2 days. Here we are 3 weeks later, and while there's no ferry dock to be getting us into town, we islanders still make a social habit of getting together at the bulkhead and watch each other trade haircuts while we wait for the mail boat to arrive.
The leaves of brown came tumbling down. remember in September, in the rain, the sun went down but like a dying ember. That September, in the rain, to every word of love I heard you whisper, the raindrops seemed to play a sweet refrain. Though spring is here to me, it's still September. That September in the rain.
My dear son, I'm writing to you during a bit of quiet time. I just took a batch of biscuits from the oven, and Father has headed off to track down Mr. Dewey for some wildflower honey. Last week, on the way up to see Mr. Chadwick, your father encountered little Rita and Kenny Sushil, each of which had just received a piece of sticky golden honeycomb from Mr. Dewey. When Father saw the children again, they'd sucked that honeycomb clean and were enjoying some nice wax chewing gum. If Father can't get us some of Mr. Dewey's honey, those biscuits are still going to taste good to me. They say food will win the war, and I want to believe I've used every ration allotment wisely. There's big news in these parts of Mr. Chadwick coming in first place for 3 of his citrus exhibits at the Florida Fair. They've done something different at the fair this year. Although the exhibits were considered non-competitive, cash premiums were awarded. And word of that in Fort Myers News Press is all it takes to get folks talking. Mr. Darling reports that there have been plenty of tarpon striking in redfish and Captiva passes, and also the big silvers are rolling at Boca Grande. And it seems a number of soldiers have been asking about tarpon fishing, but didn't know where to find boats. So down at the Fort Myers Chamber of Commerce, Secretary Seabrook has suggested a fishing tournament which could be limited to the boys stationed at Buckingham and Page Fields. In the meantime, the Chamber of Commerce is attempting to round up guides who are interested and has asked them to arrange for a telephone connection so that they could be called by interested parties. Belton Johnson has arranged with the Coast Guard on Sanibel to let him know of any inquiries that come in. Everyone helps in the effort in whatever way they can. The Sushils have been doing their part by inviting soldiers to come over to Captiva for a bit of rest and relaxation. Every Sunday, there are usually 3 trucks filled with young men who come out for swimming, fishing, sunbathing, and just plain fun. Little Kenny and Rita show the soldiers the best fishing spots, and us grown-ups watch as the youngsters teach the soldiers how to catch fiddler crabs for bait, just like you used to do, Vernon, when you were little. A funny sight is to watch the soldiers running down the beach, holding their pillow covers high overhead, filling them with air to fashion makeshift flotation devices. After they tie off the end of their pillow cover to hold in the air, the fun really starts. Those young men straddle the inflated pillow covers like you would a horse. And then great battles begin, with the young soldiers trying to upset the other from off his pillow horse. We all cheer for our favorite soldier, and later, when the play is over and the soldiers have enjoyed the snack that Agnes Sushil has fixed for them, we watch the soldiers as they lie pleasantly exhausted on the warm sand. And I say silent prayers for the real battles those young men are sure to face in the days ahead.
Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and days of old lang syne? For old lang syne, my dear, for old lang syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet for old lang
Father knew that if his letter ever did make it into my hands, it ought to be filled with good news. Here's a little report from back home to break up the routine of your day. Vernon, I'm hoping you'll be in a position to read this letter to the boys and spread a little cheer over there. Last month, Maggie had one turn left on that ever-present camera of hers, and Mother convinced her to make a photograph of Mr. Rossi and the Goliath grouper that we heard he'd brought in. If I can make it down to the mailboat on time, I'll give this letter to Captain Singleton and ask him, when he gets back to Fort Myers, to see if the photographs are ready. The silver nitrate is used in developing. It's hard to come by, as most of it goes to military equipment. But in the photographs, if they're ready, and that one of Andy is in focus, it'll be included in this letter. And that'll explain why there's a Fort Myers postmark instead of a Captiva one. I don't want you thinking Beulah was asleep behind her post office desk. Well, Vernon, I've got to tell you, something else fishy has been going on around here. From Orlando, Uncle Buzz sent word that he was looking through the Evening Star, and he reads that Captiva's all set to be having a shark rodeo. Have you ever? Well, that's the first we'd heard anything about it. So Buzz cut out the page and put it in the mail. And when that letter finally arrived on Captiva, I read it out loud, had everyone at the post office busting up. In the newspaper, it says this shark rodeo is being organized by none other than Rossi. So a bunch of us high-footed over to Andy's pier. And there we find Hunky Coon and Andy with a bunch of empty bottles in front of them. You know, you're probably thinking nothing unusual there, right? But for a change, this time, them bottles hadn't all been emptied by Andy and Hunky. Anyway, I show the newspaper column to Andy, and before long, he's wearing a big smile, finally admits he never figured this old shark tale would spread that far. Everyone got a big kick out of that, and it seems the whole island was in good humor for the rest of the week. Here's that column from the Orlando Evening Star. Captiva plans shark rodeo to celebrate 4th of July. Looking for excitement? A group of Captiva guides and landlubbers have worked out elaborate plans for a shark rodeo to be held in the vicinity of the Captiva grocery dock to celebrate the 4th of July. A.R. Rossi and Earl Johnson are in charge of arrangements, which include the capture alive of a large shark to be corralled in shallow water and muzzled for the benefit of volunteer aqua cowboys. Sharks are plentiful in the Gulf waters and do not die easily. Mr. Rossi promotes a different 4th of July at Captiva, with the support of the Captiva Law and Order Association. The shark, once caught, will be muzzled and penned. The chute, similar to those used in cowboy rodeos, will be constructed, except that the pen where the riders get mounted will be in the nature of a boarded sluiceway. The fishermen have plans to make a halter for the shark so that it can be dragged back into the sluiceway after disposing of any young men bold enough to attempt to ride it into deep water. The fisherman or swimmer who stays aboard the shark's back for the longest time will be declared the winner of the shark rodeo and will receive a gold watch as top prize. G.R. Moon, official correspondent for Captiva activities, is not quite sure who will contribute the gold watch, but promises that the reward will be made even if a delegate must be dispatched to the nearest pawn shop to attain the gold case ticker. Mr. Moon has promised more details of the shark rodeo after Sunday's meeting of the Captiva Law and Order Improvement Society. For the record, variations of this article appeared in 4 different newspapers. Yet there's no evidence to prove it ever came about. To the best of our knowledge, no one spoke of Andy Rossi's Shark Rodeo ever again.
And you all know what song is coming up. Oh, the shark bites, has such teeth, dear, and he shows them pearly white. Just a jackknife has old Macheath, babe, and he keeps it out of sight. Oh, the shark bites with his teeth, dear. Scarlet pillows start to spread. Fancy gloves, though, has old Macheath, babe. So there's never, never a trace of red.
A true gentleman, Gerald Sushil's knowledge of horticulture and farming landed him a job on Captiva, managing the plantation of Mr. Chadwick. Gerald and his wife Agnes had a fine family. My good man Vernon. Taking pen to paper, I wonder when and if this letter will find you. In the Pacific, the U.S. Navy and Marines have begun to turn the tide against Japan, and we hear plans are already being laid down for a storming of Nazi Europe. The effects of war are felt even here on this sleepy island. Often the skies overhead are filled with fighter planes from Buckingham and Page Fields. Our children watch with amusement as those planes fly far out over the Gulf and dot about like bees. But Agnes and I know those are in fact fighter planes of the Army Air Corps practicing aerial combat, shooting at targets pulled by other planes. And even as of late, they practice striking targets set up on the beach. Until recently, these routine events were barely noticed and paid little attention to by most of us. It certainly doesn't interfere in the happy play of our youngest 2, Rita and Kenny, who still have their adventures in and around our rain barrel. But last week, I don't think any of our 5 children could have dreamt up a bigger adventure. All of them were at school. Yes, that's right, all 5 of them. Rita is now in the 1st grade. Little Kenny is not yet of school age. However, the teachers allow him the occasional visit. He hops on the school bus with the rest of them. And when Kenny gets bored with school, he just wanders around until it's lunchtime or time to come home. So it was sometime after lunch when Coast Guard vehicles come roaring onto the school grounds and sailors begin swarming all over. The teachers, Mrs. Odom and Mrs. Robinson, were visibly upset when the chief petty officer explained a Cuban fishing boat was seen putting men ashore on the beach nearby. The soldiers were there to investigate the report, and after a thorough search, school was dismissed. As a safety precaution, the children were loaded onto the school bus and sent home. But the bus ride home proved to be just as exciting, because just as the children were calming down and things getting back to normal, a U.S. Army fighter plane roared over the bus with guns blazing. Of course, all of the children were frightened. Our older girls, Betty and Laura, were sure they were about to be shot. But our Gerald tells us when he heard the tink, 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 tink on the roof of the bus, he figured it was all those spent shells falling onto the bus and the roadside. He wanted the bus driver to stop and let him out so he could collect the shells. But the bus driver just drove faster and told him it was too dangerous. She wanted to get that bus away from there. That evening at supper, Agnes and I could hardly get a word in edgewise. That is until we mentioned the word homework. That made our children laugh. Turns out Miss Odom and Miss Robinson dismissed school in such a hurry, there was no homework that night. Here on Captiva, it seems we all have the glamour of the war, but none of the tragedy.
Somewhere over the rainbow way that I dream of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me, somewhere over the rainbow. Bluebirds fly, birds fly over the rainbow. Why then, oh why can't I? If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why, oh why can't I?
Tonight you've heard about events on Captiva around the time of the Second World War, and about folks who lived here during those events. We remember also countless service people who later lived on Captiva, some of whose names you'll see here.
God bless America,
Land that I love,
stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. From the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with foam.